Hey guys, it's BB Games here, and I've made a massive mistake. I stole Sewer Steve's violet green sludge, and I traded it in a GameStop for $30. I thought it was a great idea at the time. It paid for less than half a copy of Metroid Prime 4 on the Nintendo Switch. But this was a huge mistake. Sewer Steve is dry, and he's pissed, and that's why I'm hiding in here. Turns out that the violet green food coloring just does not have the same stink to it. I could just buy it back, but GameStop's reselling it for $200 and I just don't have that type of money. Worst part is, this isn't the first time I've made this mistake. Let's just say this isn't my first copy of Pokemon XD Gale Darkness. Yes, when I was a kid I owned Pokemon XD Gale Darkness. The eye-catching and dazzling box art with that purple shadow Lugia really got my attention. Not only does it look sick as hell, but Lugia was and still is my favorite legendary Pokemon, so I needed to experience what the code inside of its disc had to offer. Unfortunately, at that point, the game confused the shit out of me because I get stuck in a loop of doing the battle simulations, not realizing what I actually had to do to make progress. A little later down the line, I was able to break out of the loop and make it to the first town. I didn't hate it, but having to catch your opponent's shadow Pokemon with the snag machine instead of catching them in the tall grass was a novel concept that my brain's feeble dopamine receptors didn't really grasp onto. On top of that, the shadow Pokemon intimidated all 80 pounds of my weak child body due to their moves all being super effective against non-shadow Pokemon while being immune to status effects. And then when you caught them, you had to purify them in order to convert them to normal Pokemon, and this was just way too much for me. Fast forward the sands of time to a few years later, and I traded in my copy to a store called The Exchange for a probably much too low amount of money that I don't remember to buy like 3 death metal CDs that I most likely traded back in for something else and even less money at some point. I was in high school and didn't have much money, so my treasure hoard collections would just shift from one interest to another based off of how much money I'd get from trading things in. This is an issue I've since solved by having a treasure hoard collection of every single interest. Don't get me wrong, this made perfect sense at the time, because I didn't care too much about collecting physical games anymore, and I never got too far in the game anyways. But time has a funny way of diluting our silly brains. A few years later, a disgusting parasite infected my brain that made me want to start buying physical games again. Luckily, the damage of the trading in era to my collection wasn't horrible, but Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness was one of its greatest casualties. I wanted to go back and finally give this game a full playthrough, but it was over $200 now, and the brain parasite that now had control of my central nervous system was determined to own it. Eventually I bit the bullet and I have no regrets. Even after I bought it, the game just kinda sat on my shelf looking pretty for like a year, until finally last year, me and one of my best buddies and roommate at the time played it for the first time. And I'm gonna yap about that playthrough for the final minutes I have before Sewer Steve tracks down where I'm hiding. Even though I didn't finish this game as a kid, this era of Pokemon really tickles the nostalgia section of my mind. I grew up playing Pokemon Emerald and other weird Pokemon spin-offs that shall not be named, and they were all from the Gen 3 era. So a lot of the Pokemon in this game are classics that I absolutely love. On top of this, the 3rd gen GameCube artwork is possibly my favorite the series has looked in 3D. Quick note at the time that I'm writing this, Gen 10 was recently announced, and it actually looks pretty good, so we'll see what happens with that. Immediately you get to see vintage 3D renderings of Psyduck, Quagsire, and the Grand Everwise Sunkern in all of their GameCube glory. You also start with Eevee instead of a regular starter, which rocks because that gives you so many choices on what to evolve it into. We ended up going with Umbreon because we haven't used it that much, and I thought starting with a more defensive Pokemon would be interesting. On top of the character and Pokemon models, I love the vibrantly colored, cozy little towns and the detailed interiors of the buildings. We talked at length about how great it would be to own one of these Pokemon portraits that cover the walls of the residents' cutesy little homes. And whether it be the warm and relaxing jazz emanating from the Krabby Club, or the ancient and peaceful Agate Village theme, the music was always fantastic. My roommate and I would always go to Agate Village to heal our Pokemon when possible, just to take in its tranquil atmosphere. It's just a perfect place for the citizens of the Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness world to peacefully live out the rest of their days while gazing at the almost electrified looking water next to a 3D model of Lotad. Fantasies of spending the rest of our evenings dying of alcoholism at the Krabby Club also danced around in our heads like sugar plums on Christmas night. The music here is immaculate, and I can imagine myself coming here after a long, hard day as a sailor and drowning away the sorrows of my failed Pokemon trainer dreams and endless pictures of grape juice, while standing next to the tables instead of actually sitting in the chairs. Also, shout out to a bit later in the game when you find the stolen SS Libra and you talk to this guy who stumbled upon the ship and just decided to make it his home. Imagine just living in the captain's room of a random ship in the middle of the desert. He just put a rug and bed there and is air drying the laundry like a wilderness survival expert. Imagine trying to deliver this guy's mail, for God's sake. Now, this video isn't going to be me going through the entire story of this game because other videos already do that better than I would, but the basics are this evil group called Cypher is converting Pokemon to dark Pokemon and using them to control the Aura region. This includes Lugia, who they use at the very beginning to attack the SS Libra. You know they're evil because they're led by a 1-foot tall bald guy with sunglasses, and I've learned throughout my experiences in media that this height to hair ratio cannot be trusted. Professor Kane of the Pokemon HQ lab has something to say about this with this Pokemon Purifying Chamber, which reverts Shadow Pokemon back to their normal state, and the previously mentioned Snag Machine. You can also convert Pokemon in a Gate Village using their Relic Stone, and early on, while Professor Kane is busy getting captured, this is your only option. This was fine by us because it has some of the best music in the game. One thing I absolutely love about the Shadow Pokemon mechanic is that every trainer battle is a chance to catch a new Pokemon. Every time they throw something out there, there's this sense of excitement about whether or not it's a Shadow Pokemon that can be caught or something that must immediately die. And straight from the rip, you catch a ton of goobers. We started out with Vomit Truck the Eevee, and later turned Umbreon, and then caught and purified Evan Mobley the Teddiursa. At the first base, you get the privilege of battling the Power Rangers, who each have a Pokemon that we can catch that matches their color. And from this, we got Ben Wallace the Baltoy, Uzbekistan the Spheal, and Shriekfuck the Gulpin. This first layer immediately showed us that this game is going to be right up our alley. Not only did we get to form a team that was just a ragtag group of goobers that we normally never use, but unlike normal Pokemon games, this game uses double battles, which added another element of strategy due to being able to hit your own Pokemon with certain moves, or being able to double up attacks on enemy Pokemon. And when your opponent does have a Shadow Pokemon, it can hit like a truck, and catching it just to get it off the field, even when the thought of using it disgusts you, sometimes is the optimal strategy. These elements all combine to it possibly being the most challenging Pokemon game I've played, without it being a ROM hack or having some sort of self-induced rules. And we welcome that challenge. We continued through this first layer, and along the way caught Redacted Name the Shroomish, and Kratom 2.0 the Numel. In this layer, we were also granted a glimpse of one of the most beautiful sights that ever revealed itself to our eyes. We were in awe of the majesty, grace, and beauty of this Wailmer, but alas, all we could do was shed a single tear when we had to kill it because it wasn't a Shadow Pokemon. Maybe in a different universe we were able to have the privilege of snagging our white Wailmer. Instead, we had this ball of mediocrity. My roommate was so enthralled with this Wailmer that he started to have delusions of possibly getting a tattoo of it that have yet to form into reality. But we picked ourselves up as any professional trainer would and made it through the layer and to the next town. Around this point of the game, you get in the groove of talking to people to find out Cypher's next location, and then going there and foiling their schemes time and time again. We replaced Kratom 2.0 with a Natu named Eternity, referencing the legendary Pokemon channel Philosopher. This means that we only used and dumped experience into Kratom 2.0 at its most useless time, and got rid of it before it could evolve and never do anything. And as heartbreaking as it was, we replaced Uzbekistan with a seal named Milfbert. We were both huge Dugong fans, so this just had to be done, but it felt as if we had to choose between our children. One of our favorite Pokemon, or a Sphere of Disappointment. This was around the point when we really started understanding the synergy of this team and could start to get creative. First off, a lot of these Pokemon are very defensive, and Breloom didn't really get a strong physical attack for a while, so we had a lot of long battles where we slowly sucked the life out of our opponents. The sentiment at this time was that we were enjoying this team quite a bit, and we're fine sticking with it if nothing really jumped out at us, but if the opportunity arose, Eternity would be replaced. But we had many battles before we needed to make that decision, and for now we could just enjoy the ride with what we had. In this time there are many eventful battles, but I'm going to go over what historians consider our greatest masterpiece of a battle. In any great rivalry, both sides have to be relatively evenly matched in order to push each other to their greatest potential. I can say with certainty that Team Snag'em Gauntlet was not able to do this. As soon as he led with Octillery and Remoraid, we knew that we had smothered Mate 100. We led with Milfbert and Ben Wallace, but quickly pivoted out Ben Wallace for Nice Fella to begin the setup. Meanwhile, we surfed with Milfbert, chipping both their funny aquatic creatures that couldn't really do much. We then killed Remoraid with a Mega Drain, and our dastardly foe sent out a Sand Slash, which was the perfect receiver for a Surf and Mega Drain play call. This Sand Slash was now living on the interstice. It had 1 foot in the material world and 1 foot in the afterlife, leading to an incredibly meaty Milfbert surf kill after it sacrificed itself to get Safeguard on the field. That sound is so damn satisfying. This is the 4th surf that Octillery has taken up to this point, and it's done basically nothing because of water type moves being not very effective against water types. But this was all in our plan. This led to our sinisterly underwhelming foe sending out his Loudred, while the Octillery surprisingly did more than half to this silly fella with a super effective side beam. The next turn, Gauntlet made the mistake of not doing this again with Octillery, which led to Loudred eventually dying to Mach Punch, and Green Man getting a lot of his health back via a super effective Mega Drain. All that was left now for Gauntlet was Octillery, who again didn't side beam, and a newly revealed Crawdon. With Milfbert being low on health, we had the perfect pivot to Eternity, who had our ace in the hole, Future Sight. This move will hit a poor unsuspecting Gauntlet Octopus with a typeless special attack 2 moves later. Now the pieces were all in their most efficient squares, like the Sword of Damocles hanging over Gauntlet's position, and all we had to do was wait for our opponent's turn by stun sporing into Gauntlet's selfless but disastrous Safeguard.
The sacrifice was in vain, Sand Slash.
Crawdon could harden all it wanted, but we had already seen its fate in advance, and it was not favorable to this unlucky Team Snag'em member. Octillery finally killed Big Mushroom with the side beam, but this is exactly what we wanted, because it gave us a clean switch in to Shriekfuck. As we had planned the entire time, the Safeguard wore off this turn, allowing us to toxic the desperately hardening Crawdon. Turns out it doesn't matter how hard you are when you're violently poisoned. Shriekfuck's job was done though, and it was time to bring in Ben Wallace to apply the finishing touches on this masterclass as Eternity foresaw yet another attack. Meanwhile, Octillery took the first Future Sight, and Crawdon was further damaged by poison, leaving both these poor creatures in the red. And what happened next was more virtuistic than even the greatest Mozart symphony. In this moment, it was as if God had reached down and taken control of the sticks. We baton passed out Eternity for Shriekfuck, and then Smothered Maiden 100 became Smothered Maiden 1.
Tell my family I love them. I was supposed to win. I have brought great shame and disgrace upon you, Pop-Pop.
Not long after this battle, our adorable Milfbert Seal evolved into a gloriously majestic Dugong. With this, it learned one of the funniest moves in the game, Sheer Cold. This move has only a 30% chance of hitting the opponent, but if it does, it's a guaranteed one-hit kill. To put that in perspective, even Joey Wheeler putting everything on the line with Time Wizard in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime is a coin flip, so 30% is even less accurate. But we had to put it on there over the probably more useful Helping Hand because it's funny. From this point on, any shadow Pokemon that we didn't care about catching was presented with a clear choice. Either get in the ball, or eventually get hit by the 30% chance to be sentenced to death by sheer cold. This works so well because the Pokeball always comes out first, so the interrogated Pokemon could always get out of the situation by simply allowing itself to be captured. Tangela was the perfect first Pokemon to test this out on, since as much as I am a Tangela fan, we were not putting it in our squad this late in the playthrough, and on top of that, it was being a little stinker by killing Shriekfuck. So we sent out Milfbert to make him an offer that he couldn't refuse. 2 missed sheer colds later, and let me tell you, that Tangela got in that snag ball. I can narrate so many battles from our playthrough just like this, but these were the ones my roommate specifically wrote in his phone notes app to go over, so I just had to include them. I think it gives a glimpse of why these battles are so much fun. You're given such a unique cast of Pokemon that you normally wouldn't use, and the battles themselves are hard enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that you can't completely screw around in them at points. The animations and sound design on the attacks also made the attacks so satisfying to land, especially during the animations where they just make the Pokemon on the receiving end completely spaz out. Also, something that needs to be mentioned is that everybody in this game has such funny names. We've already heard the tale of Team Snag'em Gullet, but we've got other legends such as Net, Cypher Peon Gelston, Cypher Peon Locke, Adon, Purr, Fun Old Man Clur, and the list goes on and on. It's like they name people in this game by just making sounds until it vaguely sounded like a name, which I greatly respect. At this point we are starting to question whether or not there would be a Pokemon that wowed us enough to replace Eternity. We considered some Pokemon like Meowth for possible final team members, but it just didn't seem like this was the Pokemon worthy of replacing Xatu, so we remained patient. And let me tell you, this patience was heavily rewarded. After going through so many Cypher and Snag'em peons and admins, we eventually found a Pokemon that absolutely stunned us. Yes, a Magneton that for some reason is just 3 separate Magnemites, which duh, that's what Magneton is, but normally the models have them magnetized together instead of having air gaps between them. Instead of a normal Magneton, we had ourselves 3 selfish individualist Magnemites that rejected succumbing to groupthink. Its 3D model and animations left our jaws on the floor, unable to form words, but words were not even necessary. We had an unspoken mutual understanding almost instantly that this is what we've been searching for the whole game. And this thing didn't go down without a fight either. It took out almost everybody but Shriekfuck and Milfbert, and spooked us into dipping into our stash of revives until it finally decided that we were worthy of catching it. It does pain me a little that we replaced Eternity because I think Xatu is sick and I was enjoying it on the team, but the problem was most of our team was very defensive, and getting a Pokemon that could just spam an attack like Thunderbolt was something we didn't have. So we purified the Magneton, named it Kush Demons, and we were ready for the final stretch of the game. Let me tell you, if we didn't make this change, things would have been painful, because Thunderbolt immediately became the move we spammed the most. It did so much damage when it hit neutrally or super effectively. In the whole game before this, we were slowly whittling the opponent down, so this hit like crack. Eventually, after a million Thunderbolts, we hit a roadblock with Cypher admin Ardos. After narrowly squeaking out a few battles before this guy sort of wiped the floor with us, because not only was his average level like 44, with our team being mostly in the upper 30s, but he had Pokemon like Alakazam, Kingdra and Heracross, who are just plain great Pokemon. So we decided that we needed to grind and headed to Mount Battle. Essentially, Mount Battle is a giant mountain where you fight trainers of greater and greater strength until you lose to one of them. Every 10 trainers, the Pokemon see a significant increase in level, ranging from the level 9 Pokemon at the start to the level 58 Pokemon that eventually beat us and beyond. This took a solid 2 hours, but our team was much more comparable level-wise to Ardos at this point. Even though this got the job done, my one complaint is that it's a lot more annoying to grind in this game than it is on the mainline games due to there being no normal random encounters. Look, I love finding a good grinding spot in an RPG and going to town, but I didn't feel like the Mount Battle was cutting it for me. I did not want to fight another 2 hours of battles where I was 20 levels above my opponent most of the time again, so we were stuck with what we had. Maybe there's a better way to grind that we missed, but one of my only complaints is that I'd like to have easy access to comparable level Pokemon to grind against. And even after this, we got shit on by his back pocket Shadow Snorlax, which is so hard to deal with because you can't just poison it to slowly beat him, making Snorlax bulk even more busted than usual. But eventually we beat him and we were basically near the end. We made it to Greevil and caught his filthy Shadow Lugia with our Master Ball, and his team was tough as hell. He had Tauros, Rhydon, Executor, and level 50 Shadow versions of all 3 legendary birds. This was way higher level than anything we had, so we cheesed the last fight like we were 8 years old and just spammed revives and potions. Look, if somebody's fighting me that's way stronger than me, I'm kicking them in the balls. You can't expect integrity from a team with these names. This strategy worked and put an end to Greevil's reign of terror. All was well in the world of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, and we could visit our final resting place. Yeah, this is the life. I've had a few months to reflect on this playthrough, and it's a memory that I'll always cherish. Just 6-hour sessions on our days off, where we'd grind this without a care in the world, and I'll always associate this game with that time period. The thought of stealing a vial of green sludge hadn't even entered my mind at this point. Also, I think this game has a ton of replayability, and I'm definitely going to do many more playthroughs just seeing what kind of goofy teams I could put together. It just goes to show you that you don't know that you're in the good times until they're gone. If you haven't played this and are a Pokemon fan, I highly recommend giving it a shot. And for those of you who have played it, hopefully you've enjoyed this video and have had similar experiences with this game. And, oh no! It's Sewer Steve, come- Oh hey, you ended up getting that Whalmer tattoo after all. Sewer Steve lost his life to green sludge addiction 3 days later.